It looks like we're live.
Okay. Welcome back, everyone, to the Ancestral Healing Center. We are really excited to have you again this week. And last week, Michael brought up something that is really important to me as a clinical therapist, and something that I saw a lot in my therapy practice over the past 25 years, and that is the experience of dissociation. So we really want to talk today to individuals that may be experiencing or have experienced dissociation, and then for individuals that have not experienced dissociation, we also want to talk a little bit about what it looks like in the records if our ancestors might have had dissociation. And when we talk about ancestral healing, we're often talking about these blind spots. So dissociation is one of those things that causes blind spots in our families, in our memory, in our relationships, and in our genealogical research. So I thought we would jump right in today. But before we do that, I do want to remind everyone watching again that if there are things that Bernadette, Michael, and I are talking about that are difficult to hear, because we are going to be giving clinical examples from people who've allowed us to share their stories. We're also going to be sharing our own stories as well. And if there are things that come up for you that might trigger intense emotions or even feelings of panic, please get in touch with us. You know, we would love to hear your story and help you find the support that you need as well. So as we begin today, I'd like to start off with a definition of dissociation. And if you have a dissociative disorder and you're listening today, I know that you don't need the definition. And I know that it's a very painful thing that you're experiencing, because I actually had dissociation when I was experiencing neurological Lyme disease. I went several months. And I think Michael and Bernadette, have either of you had dissociation before, experienced a dissociative episode?
I think it takes many forms, and
Mhm.
it can be short term, or sort of high grade short term, or it can be longer term, low grade. I'm beginning to suspect that all trauma is actually a form, that it's an inseparable part. But it's not particularly visible most of the time. What you have is a highly visible, more concentrated form, where it's much clearer.
That is correct. So Bernadette, I know you have some experience too, but before we do that, I want to go over the definitions of dissociation. So dissociation, as defined by the American Psychiatric Association, is a disruption in the normal integration of consciousness, memory, identity, emotion, perception, and behavior. So like Michael said, it can take a lot of different forms. I think the people that I hear the most online and that are suffering with it regularly, they look a lot like the chronic type. But there are three types. There's a mild zoning out. Oh, I didn't hear that. That was stressful, and I kind of went away for a second. There's the moderate, which is emotional numbing, and that can last a little bit longer. I mean, we can have periods of emotional numbing that are very uncomfortable. And then severe is what I had, which is specifically called depersonalization or derealization. And these are dissociative disorders where some people have memory gaps. Other people have a change in perception, which is what I had. They have it. So I felt like I was living through a tiny straw. I felt like I was living through a straw, and I felt like I was that separated from everyone. I was also not able to connect emotionally to the people that I loved, and that was super scary. And one of the most hopeless feelings I think I ever had in my life, because I wondered whether or not I was going to feel a connection to people again.
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about trauma and dissociation, well, Bernadette, have you ever experienced any of those?
Directly, I would say probably more in the mild to moderate category. I don't feel that I've ever had the more severe, but my daughter has experienced it, and she has shared with me, and so I'm very familiar with it.
Yeah. Well, I'm really interested to have this conversation about the possibility that our ancestors had it.
Mm.
And the possibility that it could be epigenetically passed down. That was not something that I'd ever considered before doing a little bit of research on this, that a depersonalized experience could be inherited.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I know nothing about, but I'd be interested if we have viewers who have experiences, grandma experienced this and mom did, and I do as well. So I'd be happy to hear from people about that. Michael, Bernadette, examples of dissociation coming up when you're working with clients as a trauma-informed genealogist. Tell us a little bit about how it shows up in the room when you're working.
Do you want to speak to that, Bernadette?
Well, I will actually the biggest example, because it often happens with children. It's almost like an escape for them when it's overwhelmed. And I know with my own child, with my own daughter, you were talking earlier about the time where somebody was questioning her, and it was a simple question, and she couldn't answer. And after we said, what was the matter? She said, I didn't hear it. So she just stepped out. And when I worked with children, middle school children who were trauma kids, a lot of these, there was one boy in particular who would jump into this state so often. He carried with him a little Lego, and the moment you saw him moving that Lego, you knew that he was gone. And I asked him one time, I said, what does it look like there? And he said, it looks like here, but I get to do what I want. And it was such an interesting way. Those examples are the stand out to me the most. Working with some of my clients, they have kind of talked about it, but I've never seen them in that state. Is probably what I would share.
Okay. Did you have something you wanted to add to that, Michael?
Yeah, so I went into depersonalization starting around age 10. Okay, so it wasn't, I knew something was happening. And you mentioned that living through a straw. For me, the analogy I had was it was like looking through the wrong end of a telescope.
Hmm.
And you were there, but you weren't there. And that lasted until probably sometime maybe last year that I finally felt that actually come out of it. So that actually lasted about half a century. It wasn't one of a chronic one, but at the same, you talk about it being scary when you didn't feel connection. So I never really had a concept of what connection was. So there's a completely different frame of reference. So in some ways it was easier because it was normalized for longer, and in some ways it was worse because it went on for longer.
I think that a lot of people have dissociative disorders and they are unaware of it. One, it's not asked about a lot in clinical evaluations. There's none of the clinics that I ever worked in was there a standard question that asked about someone's perception of reality, besides basic reality testing. What day is it? What time is it?
Mm-hmm.
That sort of thing. But are you here? Can you
Mhm.
sense that you're here? Questions like that were not ever. So I think a lot of people don't have words for
Mhm.
dissociation. And one of the things that I'm really excited about doing as we train more trauma-informed genealogists is giving them the language to say, I wonder, have you ever heard of this definition? Is this something that you might have experienced? Even these, because it's a difficult concept, right? Have you ever felt like you were living at the other end of a telescope?
Mhm.
Is but might be relatable. If when you said that, Michael, I right away understood, because that's exactly, we were in the same place. We were in this tunnel
Mhm.
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah,
Yeah. So um, that's the client's experience. Bernadette, did you have anything else you wanted to add about the client experience?
Yeah, where the two clients that come to mind who have shared some experience is with me are both clients that have had sexual abuse in their life, and they're so that stepping out, and both of them were children. These were so it is. So it's very, when there is real trauma in a child's life, that you learn that skill of disassociation so that you can step out, and you continue it into adulthood, because once it's a skill that and I say skill, but it is that ability to step outside the intense stress and trauma you're experiencing, just to be safe. I mean, that's where you feel safe.
It is a skill. It's an innate skill. No,
Mhm.
it's the brain does it naturally. And you're right, Bernadette. I have had clients who are aware of the term, who may have gone through things like DBT,
Mhm.
dialectical behavioral therapy treatment. This is adults who've had severe childhood traumas, right? Especially sexual abuse. They know the language, and
Mhm.
they will say, this is the thing I'm the best at. I'm the best at popping out of my body. I got that down.
Yeah.
Almost as a something that they're really proud of, which I get it,
Well, I think about it, and this is may not be the point in the conversation to talk about this, so maybe we table it. But the difference between the disassociation when you pop out, and consciously going into meditation, where you are in a safe place, in a conscious, so is there a similarity between? I mean, there's a dramatic in terms of what it feels like with the tunnel and that kind of thing. But, is there a way those two are at all connected?
Michael, do you want to respond to that?
Well, I just wanted to speak on the client experience, and this is sort of what triggered this whole brought dissociation sort of up to front and center for me. It was a client who went through a very traumatic divorce at a young age, and recently reached out to their ex-partner to get for reconciliation. And during the process of the therapy, the partner had the person, the client that I was helping had recognized that she'd become dissociated, and she was able to recover all of the very precise memories of what had happened, down to the point of actually drawing a diagram of the house where it happened and the rooms
Mm.
and the movements that were made in this very very unusual situation. And so when she actually spoke with her ex-partner, she knew instantly that he was still dissociated. And I say this is from the late 1970s, so almost half a century ago, and his view of events was completely different. And what you could see in her version of events was that she wasn't trying to defend anyone. and you could see in his version of events that his psyche was trying to protect himself and minimize the extent of the event.
So I think that's important to bring up the impact of memory formation, on trauma on memory formation. And I think when we were talking about this episode, I brought up an example of what I described as, the most processed and traumatic event of my childhood that was between my mother and I. And if you ask her today, she doesn't even remember that I was there in the same space that she was in. So the impact on memory formation is huge. And I think that is a segue into how our family histories are passed down. Before we do that, though, I want to go back and address Bernadette's point. Is there a link between meditation, a safe space, and dissociation? So the way I like to describe, first of all, that's why people are coming to somebody like a trauma-informed genealogist or a trauma processing therapist, right? Someone who does things like EMDR, someone who actually kind of goes back into a memory and helps you reprocess the memory, which is both an EMDR, a hypnotherapist, a trauma-informed genealogist. They're all doing the same thing. You're going back in and re-looking at the story and trying to see it a different way. Yes, because it's that fine line that I always talk about. It's the fine line between the functional and the dysfunctional. And there was a time in your life when dissociation was functional. And if you're listening to this right now and you have it, you may be thinking, well, it's not very functional. I wish it would go away. But the nervous system still, for some reason, thinks that it's functional. Unfortunately, your conscious mind doesn't. So yeah, this work, ancestral healing, is about helping the body jump over into the safe space that everybody deserves. What was that movie there was a movie about World War II, and the girl was creating a story. She was living inside of a fantasy the entire time.
No.
I'll have it for next time. Anyway, these are, yes, it starts in childhood a lot of times, right? Because it's easier for kids to go there.
Right.
They're already there part of the time. So, okay, this transition into, let's jump into, what does dissociation look like in the records? I'm going to sneeze. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Okay. I think, Michael, I've got some questions for you. And I'm just going to go down the list here. I know you have some examples, but we haven't talked about emotional numbing yet. Reading traumatic histories with very little feeling. Either of you, maybe Michael, would you like to comment on seeing the data and not feeling anything at all?
Yeah, I would actually. This wasn't an example that I thought was going to come up today, but I can. Through my work, I had some past life trauma that came up. And as a result of that, I started doing some history reading around the period. And say, as we've said before, the thing with these past life traumas is not whether they're real, but what is the meaning of them in your current life. And I was reading, the information that came to me pointed towards a single named individual, which is something I'm extremely, kind of reluctant, because there's a high potential for, people saying, oh, I was this person in a past life. So I'm very uncomfortable with that. Nonetheless, the information has been particularly strong on that. And reading a book about a history period where there were abuses committed, I was able to read some of these abuses in a neutral way, but when I read the ones by this person, I was just completely kicking off with them. So it was a very, very visceral experience. This is kind of the opposite of the question, but that is the other thing that we see, and I think this is actually prevalent in the whole entertainment system. Is a lot of what we call entertainment is actually based around movies where people are getting killed left, right, and center, and we've actually normalized that as entertainment. So it's almost like we're training ourselves to be dissociated from killing. And I think that is a base layer of patriarchy, where the expectation is, if it comes down to it, particularly as a male, you are expected to kill or be killed, which has kind of taken this whole discussion off a long way from where we started. But, that's never happened before.
Right. Well, Michael, I will, all very interesting points, but I will kind of bring it back to, there are some things that we look at and we have nothing. And there are other things that we look at and we're extremely charged. Yes. The ones where we don't feel anything, maybe nothing, or they may just take a little bit of time. Bernadette, any thoughts about that?
Not, I want to keep going a little.
Okay. So emotional numbing might be something that we just are aware of when we're doing our genealogical research. Is it that there's nothing there, or am I not listening careful enough? And am I numbing out around this information? One example would be, you've heard the same story 10 or 12 times, and it's a terrible story, and you have no reaction to it. Well, maybe there's a reason why you're not having any reaction to this horrible story. And like Michael said, maybe part of it is we've just been acclimated to not care. And that's a problem. That's a mental health problem. That's an insanity that we're all kind of living with. Yeah.
I think there are particular symptoms. I can tell when I'm zoning out. Like I can feel it in my eyes in particular. So it's kind of by paying attention to how I'm responding. If I'm hearing a story that I've heard before, am I responding to it emotionally or mentally? Is it, is there an emotional, I want to push this away or disengage with it? Or is there just the mind going, I'm a bit bored because I've heard this? But mentally, emotionally, I'm stable. So if we observe our own responses closely, we can feel the numbing as a paradox, but you can feel there's a moment where we switch from being present to being absent. And if you pay close attention, you can develop a feeling for that switch. And then that switch, that moment where you go, I'm out of here, actually becomes a doorway. Absolutely. By feeling into it, into that doorway.
Yeah, that brings up, talking about the ancestry and what our ancestors went through. They were, so many of them, especially when you go back in the migration and the famine and the wars, and, so many of them were forced to, their families forced them to put it back, to put it aside, to not, and so sometimes it would be, we're just not going to talk about it. Sometimes it would be, I'm sure that the children had to have some type of disassociation, or the adults, in order to get through, just to make it to the next day, Yes. And when I look at my family, my father's parents died of TB when he was very young, His mother was one of 5 girls whose father died. They were all orphaned. They were put in orphanages. Really difficult situation. And the response when his 2 aunts that took care of him and his brother, they pushed everything aside. And, you never heard anything from them about the past. The only one it came up in was my father. And every once in a while, he would be a blubbery mess about his mother. And then it would go back down in again. So it's like this, you talk about, they were forced into disassociation because, it was so hard.
So I've got 2 examples in my family. So what happened is that my maternal grandparents had an affair which blew up the family. And my grandmother got evicted and my mother stayed with my grandfather. So in 1940, my grandfather drew up a family tree, and on it, his ex-wife was missing. And I recently discovered there was also a child that died prematurely that was also missing. And it just showed the family, or his piece of the family, being him and my mother, with a comment next to my mother's name that said, "1 is enough," or "1 is plenty," or something like that. So it's difficult from this, from here in time to say, was this a deliberate choice to blank out those situations? Was it just not wanting to remember something that was unpleasant, or was there a fragmentation of memory and dissociation, which then ends up in the genealogical record? And the second one is I have a photograph of my grandparents' wedding, and on the back of it, my mother wrote that this was my father and his bride. And she's disconnected from the fact that it's actually a photograph of her own mother. And to me, that seems like a fairly, and having, thinking back on her personality, it's now pretty clear to me that she was dissociated and depersonalized all through her adulthood in the same way that I became. And you can see how this is, she actually wrote on the back of the photograph, this would be 1913. And in fact, it was after World War I, because it showed my grandfather in a uniform that didn't exist until 1918. So she's completely alienated from the reality of the photograph, and she's laying down genealogical markers to reinforce her own version of events. And it's very easy coming along as genealogists 80 years later, and you find something written on the back of a photograph and you take it as gospel. And in fact, what you're reading is dissociation.
Michael, I think what you just described is why I believe trauma-informed genealogy is so powerful. So since I've met you, a whole narrative about my family has changed because I'm speaking with a trained genealogist and not the interpretations of people trying to make sense of changes, like things like name changes, right? Their own gaps in memory. So it's so helpful to have someone who is a curious and educated genealogist, because they're so, the two of you are so multifaceted in your ability to understand data and go out and find the information. So, anyone who is using something like Ancestry.com or is in a local genealogical society or something, if there is an opportunity to touch base with someone who knows about trauma and can help you look at these things through a trauma-informed lens, it's a game changer.
Mm-hmm. It's very powerful.
Yeah.
And particularly that applies to when you're looking to the absences. You're looking to what's missing and trying to reconstruct. You know, sometimes the silences in the family record are actually the places where the biggest bomb went off and there's nothing left. And trying to reconstruct those experiences both in a reasonable assembly of the facts, but more importantly, reassembling the feelings which have been literally scattered around in that dissociated way.
Yeah, yeah. So powerful. So I want to bring up, before we start to turn it over to Bernadette, who's going to do a little bit of a meditation for us in a minute. I want to go over a couple more words that come up when we think about dissociation through the genealogical process. Intellectualization, over focusing on facts to avoid emotional impact. Okay, Michael, you've got the floor since you're nodding profusely. So tell us.
Yeah, it's again a protective mechanism. It's like we retreat upwards out of our bodies, and particularly, you know, we've talked about the sexual abuse. So there's a retreat out of the whole genital area because that's a minefield, and then there's a retreat out of the heart because of the heartbreak of whatever, and then you end up left with this piece, and you then end up thinking that this piece is the whole. And I see a lot of men in particular who live up here and are not aware that there's actually anything below that.
Great description. Absolutely great description. And actually, when I think about depersonalization or derealization, when I talked about it clinically, it's like, I was up here sometimes. So you're just no longer in your physical body. And the intellectualization may be something that happens kind of right before that kind of a tipping point. Yeah.
And that you can see that in, say, when I speak to family history societies, you can see the intellectual genealogists who are pursuing every last relative back to so many generations and going after, and they're caught up in these incredibly intricate things, and they describe them in incredible detail, and everybody depersonalizes because it's just so dull, and then you can say, yeah, they're stuck up there because to come down from there into the body is dangerous.
Yeah. And we don't just do this in genealogical research, right? A lot of us live in our head a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brenda.
No, I was going to say, for me personally, when David was so sick, so my husband passed from alcoholism, and there was a period of 4.5 years that it was pretty intense. And, having this conversation is bringing up those moments for me where I really was at the point of disassociation. It was like, how do I get out of my body? How do I get out of this? And I'm sure if I looked back that I probably have examples that I could share, because, and I'm saying that because this conversation by itself is making me feel like I want to jump. And that's the feeling when you are in a situation that you can't control, and and so that's what's coming up. So anybody listening, if that's kind of what you're feeling, I'm with you. I'm feeling it too.
Okay, great point, Bernadette. That there might be exactly that point that Michael was describing. Are you aware of the point where you're just about ready to check out? Okay, I've got a couple more. Fragmentation. If someone doing research says, this doesn't feel like my family. So fragmentation. Any thoughts about fragmentation?
Did you want to go, Michael?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a very common response, because what I see is that a lot of us have an idealized version of our family and our past, our childhood. And if you look at that idealized version, it's very glossy and there are no gaps in it, despite the absence of any number of family members and any number of traumatic events. We can have this version. I have a friend who tells me that he idealized his father, and yet you can see the problems, and he's not reached a point where he can allow himself. So and once you start looking in, and you start discovering literally what look like shell splinters of your family, and you start discovering somebody did this, and this person did that, and all of this, all of these difficult things, and you end up literally staring at a family that you don't recognize, and yet you are seeing more truthfully.
Mm-hmm. That's I agree with you, Michael. And this also it takes me back to what we've done, the work we've done around shame, because shame can be the catalyst. True shame can be the catalyst that can cause the family to just ignore, just hide, ignore, and so there's so much of this is all woven together.
Yeah, but also there's the fragmentation in terms of the memories.
Yeah.
So you may have these little splinters of memory that make no sense. Yeah. So that's another facet. And sometimes it's possible to reconstruct situations. You may have enough pieces of evidence that you can put together what looks like a version of events, a likely version from the different fragments. But it's a matter of having to do the work to bring those fragments together and integrate them.
Okay. So speaking of integration, maybe Bernadette, would you like to, what I'd like to do is maybe just summarize really briefly our conversation, and then have,
Yeah, can I just add one more word in here before we do that? And that word was frozenness.
Frozen.
Yeah. And so what I see is that anything that is dissociated is emotionally frozen. It's like it's frozen in time, and it's almost like in a time capsule. Mm-hmm. And it has to stay there because it's dangerous. And the more dissociation you have, and this relates to the emotional numbness, the more emotional frozenness you have. Because if you thaw out emotionally, then that dissociated fragment is going to thaw out as well, and then it's going to catch up with you. So I'm definitely seeing frozenness, and I think this is connected to fight, flight, freeze, and fawn as well. But that's kind of spinning off in a whole other
we do that well.
The direction. But I say I notice a correlation between dissociation and emotional frozenness.
Okay, and one way that might get passed down is through, we didn't even touch on the impact of trauma and dissociation on parenting. So, we've got this behavioral passing down of ways of responding. And just really quickly, if mom is traumatized, then she's not making eye contact. She's not responding to threats or protecting the baby the way she maybe normally would if she weren't. So just our whole sense of safety is not there the way it should be if mom or grandma were traumatized, and dads as well. So we have a few things. One, dissociation is a wonderful gift, that it is something that the mind does to protect us in extreme situations, and it stays on even after the threats are gone. And it also lives in our genealogical history by means of gaps or fictions or lies in the record. And that's something that a trauma-informed genealogist can help you sort through. And they can also start to help you ground and come back into your body. And they also know when they can't do anymore and possibly need to refer you to someone who can really hold a lot more space for that trauma. So, we're super excited to kind of bring this. There's a little bit of a gap here. I think a lot of people approach their genealogical records and are just shocked by things and overwhelmed by things at times. So Bernadette has a really great exercise she wants to walk us through today to help us get back into that safe place in our body. So Bernadette, I will turn it over to you.
This is a beautiful little meditation, and it is called Coming Back to Yourself. So let's close together here. So if you're comfortable, put your feet on the floor, let your hands rest wherever they feel natural. You can put them over your heart, but whatever's comfortable. And then I want you to take one slow breath in through your nose and release it softly through your mouth. Again, inhale and exhale. Now let your breathing settle into its own rhythm, and you don't need to control it. Sometimes when life becomes too much, or when it was too much long ago, a part of us steps away. Not because we're broken, because something in us knew how to protect us. It is like a door closing softly inside. Not a failure, it's a kindness. A way our body says, this is too much right now. I'll take you somewhere else for a little while. So if you've ever felt far away from yourself, if you've ever been in a room, but not quite in the room, if you've ever lost time or gone numb, or felt like you were watching your life from a distance, that wasn't a weakness. That was survival. Now, gently, I want you to notice something simple. Notice the weight of your body in the chair, your feet against the floor, the temperature of the air on your skin. These are small things, but they are real things. And they are happening right now. You are not in the past, you are here. Place one hand on your chest if it isn't already there. Feel the rise and fall of your breath beneath your palm. That rhythm belongs to you. It has always belonged to you, even in the moments you couldn't feel. Now I want you to imagine something. Imagine that part of you that once stepped away, that learned to disappear to stay safe, is standing just at the edge of the room. Not far, just watching. Still a little cautious. You don't need to pull that part back. You don't need to rush anything. Just turn toward it gently the way you would with someone who hasn't felt welcome in a long time. And quietly say, I see you. You kept me safe, and I am here now. And take a breath with that. There is no timeline now for coming back to yourself. Some days you'll feel fully here. Some days you won't. And both are okay. Take one more slow breath. Healing isn't about never leaving again. It's about knowing the door is open whenever you're ready to return. So feel your feet on the floor, your hands where they rest, the room around you. You are present. You are safe enough. And you are welcome here. All of you. And when you're ready, gently open your eyes.
Thank you, Bernadette. And thank you for joining us again another Tuesday. I can't believe it is the end of April already. We will see you again next Tuesday. And until then, have a wonderful week. If you'd like to work with Bernadette or Michael, please find more information about them at ancestralhealingcenter.com. And we would love to hear from you. So until then, have a great week. Bye-bye.